joining us from the Locked On Panthers podcast. We're delighted to have Julian Council joining us. Julian, how are you, sir?
I'm great, man. How are y'all doing? It's awesome to talk to some folks over across the pond because I know I have plenty of listeners who follow the Panthers over there. So thanks for having me on the show.
No problem at all. No problem at all. We should also mention that our co-host Field, his brother, is actually one of those overseas Panthers fans. So I'm sure he's listening at the moment, and he is very intrigued to see what you are going to say, because he was actually the one that recommended yourself for us to try and reach out to. So we'll have to give Rian some props for that. So awesome. Thank you to Rian.
I was always wondering that when I got the DM from you guys on Twitter. I'm like, how do they even know I exist? There's or even if we were both all of us were in America or overseas, you don't know all the podcasts. So it's kind of one of those things how does anyone find me out? But it's cool that he listens, and I thank him for that. And it's also cool to just sit here and talk NFL with y'all.
Excellent stuff. We should mention, ask before we get into the Panthers, one other thing, because we ask all of our guests, mostly off air, but we didn't get a chance before we went on here. Have you actually ever had the chance to come over to Ireland?
I have never been to Ireland. No, I've never been to Europe, period.
Okay.
So I need to get over there one day. My girlfriend actually is get over there now. And I'm like, okay, I will. But, it's not like it's cheap to get overseas. So I need to get to Ireland one day. Absolutely.
Definitely, for sure. Well, sure. Next time the Panthers are playing over in London, you'll have to take the quick trip over the Irish Sea over here to Ireland, and we'll have to treat you to a few points of the good stuff.
Yes, please. And I'll say this too. Just think about how the NFL has games in London. Now they're going to play in Germany. Don't y'all kind of feel forgotten that they haven't tried to play a game in Dublin? I know college football has done that. I think Notre Dame might have a game. They were supposed to have a game last year sometime during the pandemic over in Dublin, and that kind of got nixed because of that. But I feel like you guys got to feel shorted that you haven't gotten one yet.
Oh, we are. Yeah, we are. We're having to pay those flights over to London to see those games, or I'm a Seahawks fan, so I'm going to be going over to Munich to see them face the Buccaneers in November. But we have a game in August. We have, was it Northwestern
and Nebraska,
and they're going to kick off the college season, actually.
Come on, that's what they gave you. Oh my goodness, Notre Dame would have been great, but
we have them. They are coming
there next year.
I believe it's the traditional. Traditionally, it's Notre Dame Navy. I believe it's Notre Dame Navy that's coming up next season. So
okay,
I know there's at least a rivalry there.
Yeah, because I know you've had Boston College and Georgia Tech one time. It was why
we had Penn State and UCF as well, which was. I went to that. It was nice. It was who was the quarterback for Penn State? He made it to the NFL, and he was a backup, but he set the Penn State record for yards that day. So we had something to cheer about. It was at least
was it Matt McGloin?
No, it was
was it Chad Kelly or
it was a Burger? I'm pretty sure his surname was a Burger, something Burger, one of these Metlisberger or Roethlisberger, or that kind of
okay,
sure. That the poor fella,
it wasn't Hackenberg. No, it wasn't Hackenberg.
Hackenberg. It might have been Hackenberg.
Okay. Yeah, Hackenberg would make sense. Okay, because I know that's kind of a recent thing, college football playing over there in Ireland. So cool, cool.
Yeah. So let's go and talk some Panthers. Sure. Then we'll organize a Panthers game maybe off air to come over to Ireland for sure. But we're into now mandatory mini camps. This is the first week. From your observations so far this week, how have things been going?
Yeah, well, actually, Panthers is actually next week, but they're still going through OTAs. But no big deal. I know there's other teams that have started out their mandatory. I think the teams that had new coaches have. But as far as what I've been able to observe and what I've heard and read is that Sam Darnold looked pretty good, at least on the Wednesdays on June 8th. And that it's just kind of, they're in shorts and T-shirts. There's not too much you can really get out of what's happening. They have guys like J.C. Hornback, who was their first-round pick in 2021, who suffered a broken foot in week 3. You didn't get to see him a lot last year, but there's a lot of expectations for him. Dante Jackson's back. Terrace Marshall, who was also one of their high draft picks in 2021, he came in this portion of this offseason last year, and he was in a red uniform because he just was not healthy from his career at LSU. And really all last season, he wasn't. And he's someone had a long touchdown pass on today on June 8th. And he's someone who they have a lot of expectation for him to step up, fulfill that number 3 wide receiver role, especially now that Robbie Anderson, he's not there during the voluntary portion. Now he'll be back next week for the mandatory portion. Like last year was the same case. It's kind of odd that he wouldn't be there this season, considering he didn't play well last season. And they have a new offense with Ben McAdoo as the new OC. You would think just trying to integrate yourself in the offense and learn it actually firsthand would make a lot of sense. But it's allowed a guy like Terrace Marshall to really step up and have an opportunity to kind of show what he can do, as the Panthers had a first-round grade on him a year ago, even though they were able to get him in the second round because he dropped back due to injury. So Darnold looking like okay, but it's only June. Let's see what he looks like when we actually get into pads down in Spartanburg in August. And then, of course, with training camp and everything going on there. But, yeah, right now, just they're working out things, trying to get the offense in order. You know, Panthers, they're staying healthy, which is important.
You mentioned the in Carolina, who's going to be the quarterback there. Was drafted there from last, still kind of with Garoppolo and such on the ground. The kind of league-wide, it seemed to be a lot of slander of Sam Darnold. He lost a key weapon very early on. When that weapon was there in Christian McCaffrey, people were saying that this is MVP style play that was coming out of Sam Darnold. How has the Carolina camp internally looked at Sam Darnold versus maybe more of the noise against the NFL-wide noise?
Well, I think they feel the same way about him. A lot of folks outside of the building feel about him. It's obvious if you just look at the pursuit of Deshaun Watson, who had all of his legal issues, and that's still ongoing with the Houston Texans now. And now he's with the Cleveland Browns. But they were going after him. They tried to kick the tires on Russell Wilson. General manager here in Carolina, Scott Fitterer, came from Seattle, and he was integral in the Seahawks taking Wilson in the third round a decade ago. And of course, where he had a great career in Seattle. Now he's in Denver, hoping to have a great legacy there. So you've just seen their interest in quarterbacks this offseason has pretty much told you that they want to find an upgrade. And Scott Fitterer said multiple times, whether it was at exit interviews following the season or at the combine in Indianapolis or leading up to the draft, that we are going to add to this quarterback room. Now, once he was able to get past him not getting someone like Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson, it was clear that he was going to get an opportunity to be a starter once again here in Carolina. He survived that bullet, and eventually they were able to draft someone, that being Matt Corral. But that only came after they tried to get Baker Mayfield. And from what I've been told was that the Browns are willing to pay half of the $18 million salary that Baker Mayfield's making this season, but the Panthers don't want to go over $5 million or even $3 million of that salary when they're already paying Sam Darnold the exact same salary, $18.858 million exactly for the fifth-year option. So they don't want to have $27 million rather wrapped up into quarterbacks, and neither one of them might not be the answer. So as of right now, they're sitting here saying that they believe in Sam, that they need to help Sam. And that's something that was a message early on that, hey, we need to get him some help. Offensive line, they went out there and got Austin Corbett to start at right guard after he won a Super Bowl with the Los Angeles Rams this past season. They got Bradley Bozeman, who started at center and at guard up in Baltimore. So he's a solid player. Then, of course, they drafted Ike Ekwonu with the 6th overall pick at NC State. So they've revamped the offensive line. And now they're going to have a guy like Brady Christensen, who they drafted last year in the 3rd round, start. And then, of course, you have Taylor Moton at right tackle. So the offensive line on paper looks like it is a lot better than it was last year. And I would imagine that would be the case, but it's obviously just a projection. So they're getting him that kind of help. And whoever started at quarterback was paramount for the Panthers to have any sort of success in 2022. And now with Ben McAdoo, who's trying to get him down to basics of his footwork, especially, that might help Sam, hopefully. So that the Panthers recognize that he's not the long-term answer unless somehow he bounces back this season and just has an incredible year, that he's only going to be the starter for one more season, as they want to bring along Matt Corral slowly and likely have him start in 2023.
And a quick follow-up, how much do you think at the moment as it sits now, does the weight of the Carolina offense lie on Christian McCaffrey? In other words, if they sign some of these offensive free agents, are they still, in your opinion, overly reliant, or maybe not overly reliant, but expecting a lot of production out of Christian McCaffrey that could compensate for either Sam Darnold's lacking or the struggles that any quarterback is going to have coming into a a new season under a new offensive system and trying to learn that as they go?
It's a great question. I go back and forth on what the real value of Christian McCaffrey is. Like, I look at running backs as a position that should be making federal minimum wage because you can find anybody to run the football. There's just been plenty of examples. When he was out in 2020, they brought in Mike Davis, and he had a fantastic season going over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. Now, is that the same as what Christian McCaffrey did back in 2019, the last time he was healthy, and had the 1,000-yard receiving, 1,000-yard rushing season? No, but he gave you solid production. Last year, probably not as great with a rookie and Chuba Hubbard, who they were relying upon. Once McCaffrey went down, Amir Abdullah, who they brought in later on the season, did add something, at least in the pass game element, which is really what makes McCaffrey great. And you go back to the first 3 weeks of the season, like really the first 2 weeks, I think he was targeted like over 25 times. And Sam Darnold used him as his check down, as someone he had to rely on. So losing him obviously hurt him, but I don't really know how important McCaffrey is to winning. Because the last time he was healthy in 2019, like he did something, like I said, the 1,000 season. That's only happened 3 times in NFL history. Marshall Faulk is a Hall of Famer. Roger Craig was on those great 49ers teams in the 80s and 90s and likely probably should be a Hall of Famer. Like, those are the 2 guys who did it. If those guys were on winning teams. McCaffrey was not on a winning team because in 2019, Cam Newton gets injured. Kyle Allen, who's not a starting quarterback, has to start the majority of the season. They throw Will Grier out there in the final 2 weeks of the season. But the problem was the quarterback position. And I believe they went like 5-11 that year. In the last 2 years, without having McCaffrey, they've won 5 games. So clearly, at least to me, I don't really see Christian McCaffrey correlating to wins for the Carolina Panthers. The only time that he's ever had success in the league, well, at least winning-wise, was back his rookie year in 2017. And that's when Cam Newton was still a Cam Newton. So I think really it matters more the quarterback play, more so than what if Christian McCaffrey's healthy. Obviously, yes, he's a key piece to the offense, but the quarterback play is paramount to whatever success they're going to have. And Christian McCaffrey being there to at least help them out and be one of the top playmakers in the NFL will obviously be important. But I'm not going to sit here and say, like, yeah, Christian McCaffrey is the key to whether the Carolina Panthers have a winning season or not, because last time they had him healthy, they didn't win with him. And when they haven't had him healthy, they haven't won with him without him.
Mm-hmm. So then could scheme be one of those things as well? Because we saw last season Joe Brady lose his job as offensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. Ben McAdoo, like you mentioned just there, is now come in and he is the new offensive coordinator, of course, for people that are trying to figure out where they've heard the name Ben McAdoo before, former Giants head coach. So do you think that yourself personally, do you think that this move now to bring McAdoo in, seeing what he did in New York with the Giants, is this the right move to get the best out? If it is Darnold that starts, or if it is Corral that starts, or even if they do make the move, like you said, for Baker Mayfield, do you think that what you've seen in New York with McAdoo's done before can put this Panthers offense in the right direction?
Yeah, and I'll answer. And also, you brought up scheme too. Like at the beginning of your question, like Joe Brady had no business being the OC here in Carolina. None. Like when LSU had that great national championship season with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, Terrace Marshall, and Justin Jefferson, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, all guys who have so far had great success in the NFL. Outside of Marshall, who just was injured last season, like it wasn't Joe Brady. He didn't recruit those guys. He didn't even call the plays. But for whatever reason, he was given all the credit because he helped bring the Saints scheme to LSU. And Coach Ed Ogeron, who used to be the head coach at LSU in that year, he was a big part of it. So I never really felt like he should have been here in the first place. Like everyone was excited, but I was kind of like, yeah, I'm excited too because he's the hot name. He was assistant of the year in college football, but he didn't call the plays. And like I have good friends down in Baton Rouge who I talked to, and they were like telling me like, yeah, I mean, he's great, but he's probably not ready. And theoretically, when you come to the NFL, you're going against the best minds defensively in football if you're going to be an OC. And his scheme was tired. He didn't really make a lot of adjustments, and we saw how that looked like, especially at a halftime where the last 2 seasons, this team struggled mightily out of the half in the third quarter, especially if you just go back and look at the splits of Sam Darnold. Like that would help him just having someone with experience. And Ben McAdoo, when he came to New York as the OC, like they had struggled, even with Eli Manning there as their quarterback. And he was able to get the best out of that team where he took him from one of the worst offenses in the league and then 2 seasons had him in the top 10, which he helped parlay into being the head coach of the New York Giants, which didn't go great because when you're the head coach, as y'all know, like you really need to be more of a CEO, leader of men, more so than you need to be someone calling the plays. And I know there's guys like McVay who've done that recently and Shanahan have called the plays, but they're a little bit different as far as what their scheme is and what they're trying to do than Ben McAdoo. But his evaluations of quarterbacks going back to the Sam Darnold draft class and Baker Mayfield draft class has pretty much been spot on. Like a guy like Josh Allen has turned out to be fantastic. He didn't believe in Rosen. He looked at Sam Darnold as far as what his inefficiencies were, as far as his technique and his fundamentals. And now knowing those and now seeing the tape and working with them hand in hand, that might be able to help Darnold play the best he's played. Like Matt Rule came out and said today that it's the best practice he's ever seen of Sam Darnold. Again, it's only June 8th, so I don't really take too much from that, but you're already seeing maybe the early kind of signs of Ben McAdoo kind of getting, his hands at Sam Darnold and finding a way to like get him back to basics and get him to play the way that he should play. Because he was a number 3 overall pick. So theoretically, I mean, in theory, like he's more talented than Matt Corral. Just at least how the NFL valued him. Like they valued Matt Corral as a 3rd rounder. They valued Sam Darnold as a number 3 overall pick. So I think McAdoo could help him. I got to see it before I'm going to really sit here and believe it.
Yeah, totally. Now, then looking in front of the quarterback with the offensive line, you've mentioned all the incomings that they've had. They've made a definite push to improve that offensive line this year that struggled so much last year. One player that I heard on your most recent podcast that you class as probably one of the most important free agent signings that they had was Bradley Bozeman, who came over from the Ravens. He has played both center and guard, but do you think yourself, is he going to be playing more center?
Yeah, I would imagine he's going to come in and play center. Pat Elflein, he came in last year on a 3-year deal, but you knew he was going to start. He had the money. He wasn't great last season at left guard. So I would imagine they want to put Brady Christensen there, who was their 3rd round pick last season, and they had a 2nd round grade in him as a guard, and he's someone who's been able to play all over the offensive line, whether it's been right tackle, left guard, right guard, and they even think maybe one day he can play center. I think he'll factor in there at left guard. So that means it's going to be Bozeman versus Elflein, who filled in at the end of the season after Matt Paradis, who was their center the last 3 seasons, went down with an ACL injury, and he played far better there. He actually started his career out in Minnesota with the Vikings as a center. Back in college at Ohio State, he was the national center of the year his last season there at Ohio State. So he's much better there. But he's not as big, and that's one of the issues. You with that position, having to go all that weight in front of you at defensive tackle, you need to have a center that's bigger. And hearing what the Panthers have said about how they want to have more of a downhill rushing scheme this year, Bozeman is, I think, 10, 15 pounds heavier than Elflein. He's also just been a better player. If you look at like the advanced analytics, like Pro Football Focus, Football Outsiders, they haven't rated Elflein very highly, and Bozeman's someone who I think will win that position at center, and it's so vital. So they have Ryan Khalil for like a decade, and he was always steady, always healthy, out there, team captain, and having someone right there in the center to communicate and get that offensive line together, I think is vitally important. I think it's also overlooked. So we spent a lot of time talking about the left tackle here in Carolina because we hadn't had one in seemingly a decade as well. To have someone at center who has the experience, who's also healthy, because that's not what Paradis was 3 years ago when he came to Carolina. I think Bradley Bozeman can be a massive addition for the Panthers. It might be one of the most important additions on this roster if he's able to win that spot indeed and play at the level he's played the last couple of seasons in Baltimore.
Julian, were you surprised as well, speaking of the offense, that, okay, they addressed some of the problems on the offensive line, but elsewhere in the offense, particularly in the wide receiver, I'm sure there's DJ Moore there and Robbie Anderson. I guess a lot of people could debate how high up a depth chart on other teams he would be. Are you surprised they didn't reach out a little bit more in the free agency to try and get some of the top talent? Obviously, names like OBJ were out there, and he could easily fit into the Carolina Panthers. Is that something you were kind of interesting that they didn't address in free agency?
I thought if anything, they might draft somebody, but they did draft 2 guys last year. And after the draft, they signed 5 undrafted free agents, all that were wide receivers. They've recently cut one to bring back Keith Kirkwood, who's been on the team the last 2 seasons, but he's dealt with injuries, shoulder in 2020, then last year had a concussion early on in training camp and didn't make the roster. And he hasn't really added anything so far, but he's a Temple guy where he was coached by Matt Rule. So, I mean, it would have been nice. They extended DJ Moore, so that's them basically in that free agency period doing something at the wide receiver position. It was an obvious thing to do. As far as with Robbie Anderson, like I'm pretty out on Robbie at this point. I didn't necessarily disagree with them extending him last year. I thought it made sense. He had a career year. And with Sam Darnold, you think, okay, maybe there's that connection there that they had in New York back when they played together with the Jets. And just his attitude last season, like, yeah, I'm not going to call what he did against the Eagles when Darnold threw 3 picks, a tirade, because the guy, it's his job. They put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it. You should be passionate about it. I just, don't love it. Like when you duck the media. Now he did come the next day to talk to him. But still, when you duck the media, when you call it the fans being like, they're not real fans. Like, dude, you've never done anything here. You've come to Carolina, and the 2 seasons that you've been here, you won 10 games combined. So I really don't want to hear from you when there's all these Panther greats that have come and gone. Like, I mean, Steve Smith never called it the fan base. Musim Muhammad never did that. Rookie Pearl never did that. Like, there's great receivers that have come here to Carolina. And so with him, I think he's better than what he showed last year. I just don't really value him that much. Terrace Marshall has the potential. He has great size at 6'4", great speed, great athleticism, just hasn't been healthy. And if he can stay healthy, then I think he can overtake Robbie Anderson, who's really a very frail dude. And he's only really, and I'm shocked that he's even able to stay as healthy as he does in the NFL, Robbie Anderson, that is, because he's just so skinny. So I don't feel great about the wide receiver position based on what I saw last year, because they did struggle with drops as well, especially DJ Moore at 10. I do think that with Moore, he's a solid player. Anderson's better when he's shown, and Marshall absolutely is going to be someone I think has a big impact this upcoming season. So it's really things I need to see at first, but I think it's something that people should kind of take pause on, but I think they'll be fine at the end of the day.
Yeah. Julian, I have 2 quick questions to ask you there before we let you go. First of all, I want to flip it over to the defensive side. An interesting one that we've seen there in the last couple of years, an area of concern for the Panthers has been the linebacking position.
Yeah.
Now, this season they brought in the likes of Corey Littleton and Damian Wilson. They also use, I think, they used a 3rd round pick on, was it Brandon Smith as well? They brought in as well.
Yeah, 4th round pick on Brandon
Smith.
4th
round, sorry. So like that Luke Kuechly shaped hole is there gaping in the Panthers defense. And are you confident with any of these additions in the offseason that they try help? I know Shaq Thompson's had a really good year. He played there last year, but I don't know. What do you think personally? Are these moves now in the offseason the right ones to try and help that position?
Yeah, I mean, Shaq Thompson looked like a Pro Bowler in the first 3.5 games before he hurt his foot in Dallas, and when he finally came back, he still was a solid player, and he's going to be he's going to be a captain again this season. From what I heard from Phil Snow, the defensive coordinator today, is that they want Damian Wilson to be the middle linebacker, the Mike linebacker, and move Shaq more to the weak side on 1st and 2nd down, then on 3rd down, and especially the obvious pass rushing downs, they're going to have Shaq in the middle of the defense like they did oftentimes last season. So Wilson had a great year last year in Jacksonville, and he started off in Dallas. He ran into some legal trouble that's still going on this offseason with his ex-girlfriend, and apparently he threatened to kill her or something like that. So that's obviously not great. But we know how the NFL handles those situations by not handling that at all. But I've talked to people who cover the team even more closely than me, and they said that they believe that he'll be available, which will be important. Corey Littleton is someone also who's been a veteran. I thought he was fantastic with the Rams. He signed a deal 2 years ago with the Raiders down in Las Vegas, but then lost a starting job this past year, kind of disappointed. But adding some of that veteran depth, they didn't have that last year. They had Shaq, then they had Jermaine Carter Jr., who's now in Kansas City, and then behind them was just really nobody. It's just random dudes that were former Temple guys or in their 5th or 6th NFL team. They just didn't have any depth. I feel like they have more depth this year. And you also add in Brandon Smith, like you mentioned there from Penn State. I feel better about the linebacking core. And Phil Snow also mentioned that he thinks that they'll be a lot better, especially against the run this year with those backers, which I think when you bring up Luke Kuechly, like that's been the problem. People ask like why the Panthers have been so bad against the run. It's like, well, Luke Kuechly, who filled all those holes, him and Thomas Davis, who filled those holes for a decade, no longer play for this team or in a National Football League.
Yeah, that's it. Well, hopefully they can sort of fix it with those veterans that they brought in. And finally, then we should really ask about the head coach, Matt Rule. There has been some rumors going around that he is going to be in the hot seat heading into this year. Do you think yourself that if he has another disappointing year, the Panthers might be looking to move on?
I would think so, but it's hard to say that now after hearing both from Rule and the owner, David Tepper, in recent weeks. David Tepper and Rule have both talked about when he first came here that they told him, like, hey, this is going to be a 5-year project to try and turn this thing around, because they broke it down to the studs. Like, they had a ton of veterans on that defense in 2019 that was second in the league in sacks, and you saw many of them: Mario Addison, Bruce Irvin, Gerald McCoy. You saw a lot of those guys leave. And I mean, Luke Kuechly is one of them as well, who retired. You saw a lot of James Bradbury go to New York, now with Philly. You saw a ton of veterans leave that defense. And that's what took them time to now try and rebuild it, which I think they've done a great job of so far. And now they're trying to rebuild the offensive side of the ball. So the 5-year plan is great in theory, but the NFL is one of those leagues where in an off season, you can go out there and fix a unit. You can find playmakers, difference makers. It's set up to be fair for everyone to go 8-9, 9-8 now that we have a 17-game schedule. And Matt Rule just hasn't shown the improvements in the win-loss column like a lot of fans would want to see. And back at Temple and at Baylor, it was usually terrible the first season, get kind of mid-level the second year. Then you have that great leap in year 3 when you're competing for a conference championship back in college. But now maybe I would think a playoff position. And that could happen. As I look at it, I do think they made progress last season. Like, defensively, they were phenomenal for the most part last year until they kind of had the injuries and they were bad against the run the final half of the season. Special teams, why they found a kicker. Offensively, now that obviously was an atrocity last season. He's gone out and he's hired former guys, and Steve Wilkes, who used to be here in Carolina's defensive coordinator, who's a Charlotte native, who was in Arizona for a season as a head coach. He's hired Paul Pasqualoni, who's been a college head coach, who's in his 70s, forgotten more football than all of us will ever know in our lives. Chris Tabor, who's consistently been a top 10 guy when it comes to special teams coordinators and who has been an interim head coach in this league, and Ben McAdoo, who's been a head coach in this league. So getting that head coaching experience, I like everything he's done so far. And he talked about how now he's really trying to connect with his players, which he hasn't been able to do with COVID and all the restrictions that they've had the last 2 seasons. So yeah, he's got to win. Absolutely. I don't know if he can survive another 5-win season. Like, with the general public, he's already lost pretty much the fan base that you see on social media. Now, has he really lost all the fan base? I don't know, but I don't know if he survives another 5-win season. I think he's got to get to I don't know. I don't want to say he's got to get to the playoffs. He's got to show some discernible progress when it comes to the win-loss column. So if you get the 9 wins, maybe 8 wins, he might be fine. But you really need to have that foundation where David Tepper believes, like, hey, this is my guy long term. But he said 5 years, but we'll see if he's going to practice what he preaches.
Yeah. And look, it is a division this year, the NFC South, that has got a few issues in it. You know, you have the issues with the Falcons. They look like they're in full rebuild. Obviously, the Saints are moving on from Sean Payton, and there's still question marks on their quarterback position. And we don't know how Dennis Allen will do as a head coach. He's a great defensive coordinator, but when he's looking over the whole team, we'll have to wait and see. And then with the Buccaneers, and I've said it to Fionn many times on this show, that I myself personally think they made the wrong decision by bringing in Todd Bowles as the head coach. I thought it would have been better to have Byron Leftwich and bring him up as the head coach, and have Todd Bowles continue as defensive coordinator. I know Todd Bowles has the experience, but to have that experience to help a rookie head coach would be, I think, a lot more favorable. But look, there's issues there that it just takes a bit of consistency, and I think a team that has a bit of consistency can do well in that division.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think Tampa's going to run away with it, and the first 2 seasons there of Matt Rule here in Carolina, they have not been competitive at all against Tampa Bay. And I don't imagine that's going to change very much this season. Maybe they can be better when they play them at home. But as far as New Orleans, I still think they have a better roster than Carolina. I believe in Jameis. I think the Saints would have been a playoff team last year had he not gotten injured. And I felt like that was fairly clear when Sean Payton's still out there having competitive teams with Trevor Siemian, who didn't win a start, but at least they were in the games. And then Taysom Hill there at quarterback. So I think the Saints will be fine. I think they can probably be right there also. And then Atlanta should be terrible. But Atlanta wasn't great last year. Neither was Carolina. Carolina split the season series with them, and they did the same thing with New Orleans. So if they can find a way to go 3-3 in a division by sweeping Atlanta and getting a game from New Orleans, I think that puts them in good position just based off of, what else they can do. Now they have to play the AFC North this season, which is probably the best division in football. And they're going to play the NFC West that has been one of the best divisions of football. I don't know where Seattle's going to be this year. Not Russell Wilson's gone, but you still have to deal with Arizona. You still have to deal with the Rams just won the Super Bowl. And of course, San Francisco now going to Trey Lance. Like, it's still going to be a good football team. So yeah, I mean, the division, it's gettable outside of Tampa, but it will take some time. They got to find some consistency, but I think they can be 500 at the very least this season in the NFC South.
Excellent. Listen, Julian, we really appreciate the time you've taken to speak to us today. You've given us some more of your time than we probably asked initially. But before we let you go, if people are interested in checking out the podcast or following on Twitter, where can they find it?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Julian Council, and you can check me out on all social media platforms there. And you can find podcasts pretty much wherever you find y'all's podcast. So that could be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much wherever you get your podcast from. Locked On Panthers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. So yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's cool. It's always fun to link up with the NFL fans from all over the world. Because I mean, I always think like football, just an American sport. Like, why would anyone outside of America even watch this nonsense? But hey, I love that you guys love it because it's great. I mean, it's a game that's growing. It's cool to see that they're going to Germany, and hopefully one day the NFL will make the trip up to Ireland as well to play in Dublin, because that'd be sweet. It'd be awesome for you guys and everyone in your country who loves the NFL.
Well, Julian, I must actually mention as well, we don't just watch this nonsense. We actually play this nonsense as well. We have a full-fledged league over here that we take part in. So, it's definitely taken over here. And I think it'll be crazy not to have a full NFL game over here within the next 5-10 years, hopefully. Well, like I said, listen, we really appreciate your time. We will definitely love to have you back on the show again, probably closer to the season. If not, definitely at some point during the year.
Absolutely. Anytime you guys want me, I'm happy to talk and represent the Carolina Panthers in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Excellent stuff. And that is where we're going to wrap up this edition of the show. Fionn, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Make sure you are following us on our Twitter at UnderCenterPod, because we are going to be releasing the name of our special guest for next week's show. And it's definitely one that you're not going to miss. But until the next show, stay safe and we'll see you soon.